right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the September 3rd Thursday Web Forum for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS partnership. As always, I am your host, Hillary Morris, and we hold this web forum on the third Thursday of every month right here at 10 a.m. as an opportunity to share the latest updates on the blueprint, get input and involvement from folks like y'all, and highlight exciting science and success stories in the world of landscape conservation in the Southeast and Caribbean. So here's our usual agenda for the day. I'll start by introducing our speaker, who will present for 40 or 45 minutes. We'll have time at the end for Q&A and discussion, and then I'll wrap up by previewing next month's webinar and sharing some updates from your SECAS staff. You probably noticed, but I am recording this web forum just for the handful of people who inevitably wanted to come but had a conflict. I will post the link to the recording on YouTube and the slides to the SECAS website within a couple of days. And if you have trouble finding that, you can always just reach out to me and I'll ping you the link. Any questions or comments before I introduce Corlee and we get started? In that case, I will introduce our speaker. Today, we're going to be hearing from Corlee Thomas-Hill, who's the Tribal Liaison with the Southeastern Grasslands Institute, or SGI. They've been a fantastic partner to SECAS over the years, helping develop our grasslands indicators and more. SGI is working to incorporate Indigenous ecological knowledge into their conservation and restoration projects and ensure tribal priorities are considered in all of SGI's work, and that's what the program Corlee does. So please take it away and give us your overview. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Sure, I can see my screen. Okay, so I'm Corlee Thomas-Hill. I've been with Southeastern Grasslands for about 2 years now. I started initially as a part-time position for a Cumberland Plateau restoration, or not restoration project, but a Cumberland Plateau project. And so I was hired full-time about a year ago as a tribal liaison. And so I'm just going to do an overview of what we've been kind of up to for the last year and a half trying to build out this program. So for those of you that don't know, the mission of SGI is a pretty simple one. We just want to save the grasslands of the Southeast, and we consider no grassland too small. We have a complement, not compete policy with other agencies and partners who are also working to conserve southern grasslands. And SGI was created in 2017 by co-founders Dwayne Estes and Theo Witzel, and it's based at Austin Peay State University Center of Excellence for Field Biology. And we've grown significantly over the last 2 to 3 years. We have over 30 staff now, and we're going to continue to grow significantly over the coming years. We have a lot of grants that we've been given over the last couple of months that I think are going to add some really cool positions. And we have a lot of great positions open right now as well. So SGI's focal region is the biogeographic Southeast. So it's all or part of 24 states. And the tribal program works with tribes that have current or historical homelands within our focal region. And then we consider the green areas to be more open spaces, not necessarily like open prairies, but just open ecosystems. So our tribal program started about a year and a half ago, and we've been working to kind of figure out what that looks like and what we want it to be. And it's fully funded right now through USDA and NRCS, through the Working Lands for Wildlife. Sorry. So there's Dwayne saw it as, you know, the need to support tribal voices within the Southeast. And there's a need to support tribes with getting native plant materials and storing and sourcing seeds. And there's a lot of this going on in the Southwest, but there's kind of more of a need for it now in the Southeast. And how do we get things like that off the ground? So we talk about the wave of grassland loss throughout the Southeast. So the map in the upper left-hand corner shows Indian removal from the Southeast, and then the bottom right-hand corner shows the extermination of bison from the Southeast. And so the biodiversity of native plants plummeted when the onset of the United States westward expansion started. And so as westward expansion started, around 1750, we see this wave of grassland loss. And we also see this wave of bison removal and indigenous removal. So I think about 1830s, about the time that Cherokees were removed from the Southeast. Other tribes as well moved removed from the Southeast into Oklahoma. As Native Americans and bison and other large grazers removed, we saw these ecosystems just begin to collapse. So grasslands were previously cared for by Southeastern tribes through fire, includes cultural burning, as well as large grazers such as bison and elk. Bison wallows were an important part of the prairie ecosystems, and with bison being killed off to near extinction, it tied into the loss of grasslands throughout the Southeast. And it's not just the loss of these large grazers, it's a lot of these animals that are culturally significant to Indigenous peoples, such as wolves and beavers and birds, bats and other pollinators. One of my favorite pictures is this one on the upper right. It's an elk standing on Kadua Mound, which is a culturally significant site for Cherokee people. And so I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, so a lot of my knowledge comes from my tribe. And so a lot of this presentation seems kind of more Cherokee-centric, but obviously we work with all the tribes in the Southeast, but I tend to talk about what I know. So just keep in mind that there are a lot of other tribes from the area, but this is kind of Cherokee-centric. So another change to our landscape is the shift of how we use fire. For the last 80 years, more than 80 years, we've focused on containment and suppression fire. I think everybody's familiar with Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent wildfires. It's currently the most common practice. And the goal of suppression fire is just, to stop wildfires. But like many other conservation agencies, SGIs kind of move towards intentional and prescribed fire, which is burning with specific purposes and promoting ecological health, as well as invasive species control. And a lot of the species in the Southeast that are found in grasslands are very much reliant on these fire, and they are fire-dependent ecosystems, such as, longleaf pine savannas or white oaks. And so by removing fire from these ecological systems, we've seen the loss of many of them. There's been kind of a shift right now. I think a lot of excitement around cultural burning. It's very similar to intentional burning. I think there's, a lot of overlap, but then there's also the cultural side of, we're doing this for a reciprocal relationship with the land. There's some spiritual aspects to it. We're taking care of medicinal plants and things like that. But we have a lot of barriers to cultural fire still, specifically on tribal lands, which are usually held in trust by the federal government, which means that there's a lot of policies on how we can use fire. And so it's sometimes still not legal for us to burn within our sovereign lands. I think there's still, even, within the Indigenous community, a lot of fear around fire, especially now, with wildfires and the amount of fuel on the ground that has completely changed, how we would be able to burn in the future as well. We've also been disconnected from fire for a long time. So I think a lot of Indigenous people, we consider the knowledge to still be there, but it's sleeping. So in order to wake it up, we have to interact with the land. And so I think that's why there's so much excitement around cultural fire right now, because we are having these opportunities to do it, and we're seeing these policies change. So I want to go over a few culturally significant plants that are supported by grasslands. Indigenous tribes throughout the Southeast have similar uses for a lot of these plants, but obviously individual tribes can have a different relationship with them. And many tribal members consider plants to be relatives who should be interacted with and cared for. One example I like talking about is, I'm terrible with scientific names, but Tephrosia virginiana. This was a plant I wasn't really familiar with until this year, and I was out with our director of restoration, and he introduced it to me. But he used the scientific name, which he's trying really hard to get me to learn all these scientific names, and I'm trying really hard. But he introduced me as the scientific name and also as goat's rue. And scientific names are important. They serve their purpose of identifying these plants. But as a non-botanist, I'm really struggling with remembering them and learning them and pronouncing them and all these things that I think a lot of people who aren't botanists struggle with, and some botanists struggle with. So I'm more likely to remember the common name of these plants once I've seen them. But I had posted a picture of this on my Instagram, and a friend who's very familiar with medicinal plants texted me, and he said, "Where'd you find that devil's shoestring?" And I was like, "What is devil's shoestring?" So I had to Google and figure out that he was talking about goat's rue. He then told me how he uses it for medicine, places that it grows locally to around where I am. And then I was able to learn more about the plant, and I was able to look it up in the Cherokee medicinal plant book that I have using the name devil's shoestring. So I like to talk about it because we run into the problem of plants having multiple common names and local names, but native plants also have indigenous names. So a lot of the indigenous names are no longer being used as much, but they also serve an important cultural purpose. A lot of that information, though, is sometimes incorrect. It might be wrong. It was usually extracted from tribes without permission or used for profit by people who came in and kind of just took this information. So tribes are really shifting towards people no longer having others speak for them. So we want to make sure all this information that's coming out is correct. And then I think another problem is a lot of the times when people talk about indigenous people, they talk about us in a past tense, but we are very much still here, and we're very much still stewarding the land that we always have. And then there's a lot of ecology in our indigenous languages. Indigenous names for plants and locations can tell us important ecological information, and all indigenous language in the Southeast are extremely descriptive, but they don't always translate to English very well. But they can tell us about where these plants grow, how they grow, what their medicinal purposes were. And I think another important part of this is place names. So, Western society tends to name places based off the first person to supposedly discover them. And I think a great example of this is Clingman's Dome, formerly Clingman's Dome. It was renamed back to the Cherokee name Kuohi actually a year ago this week. And in Cherokee, Kuohi tells us that this was the mulberry place. And there's a lot of examples like this throughout the Southeast where indigenous languages have named these places, but they are no longer being used, which means that information is being lost in some ways. And I think a lot of things that kind of tie into that is that there's also this burden that's being placed on our fluent speakers in order to try and save it, but it's having to be funneled through them, which is placing a lot on them. So it can be difficult sometimes in a slow process to bring some of these names back. But tribes are working really hard to ensure that our languages continue to survive for generations to come. And I encourage you, wherever you are, look up, an old indigenous place name that's been used for centuries. There's so many examples of this. So these are a few examples, and I mean very few examples of some medicinal plants used throughout the Southeast. So I've used just, the common English name for these in this, but I think it's important to keep in mind that these plants also have a Cherokee or Choctaw, Muskogee, Chickasaw, Yuchi, other tribal names that can tell us more about the plant and the relationship that we have to them. These are some more common but important culturally significant plants. And I think one thing that's important to talk about is food sovereignty for tribes. A lot of our traditional food sources are found in grassland ecosystems such as Chickasaw plums. And then I can't not talk about river cane. I think over the last probably year, river cane has become one of my favorite plants, and I think it's hard not to. But river cane is, of course, a grass, and Southeastern tribes use river cane for anything and everything. It's kind of, I've heard it's like our plastic. We used it to weave baskets or make blowgun darts, traditional flutes. It was used for housing and to weave mats. But we've lost about 99% of the river cane ecosystem. So now it's really difficult to find a cane break versus a river cane patch. And cane breaks previously took up a lot of acres, and they were difficult to navigate through because they were so thick. And if you've seen a river cane patch lately, you know, there's not a lot of these left. I don't think I've ever actually seen a good, healthy cane break. There's still a lot that's unknown about river cane, how often it flowers or goes to seed. And I think one of my favorite things that I've done since I've started in this position was I got invited down to northern Alabama with the Native Habitat Project to collect river cane seed during a mass flowering event. That was specifically Tallapoosa cane, but I also got to see it flower here at home at Kadua, and then also in Great Smoky Mountains National Park as well. I think river cane is just a great example of a cultural keystone species. It's still heavily used, and there's a huge movement within the Indigenous community to preserve it. And a lot of people are unaware that river cane is actually just a native bamboo. And so I think part of the loss of the ecosystem is they think it's this invasive bamboo and just go out and cut it out and don't realize how important this ecosystem is. But there's 4 different types of river cane that we know of. There's the giant river cane, Tallapoosa cane, which is similar, but you can identify it by these kind of stacked nodes that you can see. Hill cane's unique. I really like hill cane. There's a patch of it that I watch every year, and I think it's really helping me learn from it. But it's cool because it's one of the ones that's not an evergreen. So in the winter you can go and it's just this bright white across the entire landscape. And then switch cane is shorter, but it has wider leaves. So different types of river cane have these different uses. I've been told that there's no scientific observation of hill cane being in flower or gone to seed. So I think it's my life goal right now to find some, and that's why I just like watch it all the time and see if I can find it going to seed. And I think the only state where all 4 occur is in Alabama, but I think maybe Georgia as well. SGI has multiple sites where we're doing river cane restoration and long-term goals of co-stewarding these patches with tribes and allowing people to come out and harvest and interact with this river cane in ways that, you know, is good for the ecosystem. It's really hard to grow from seed, but I think there's been a lot of success growing it from rhizomes. And then I think right now, river cane restoration is really important, but it's being viewed as being for future generations because it does have such a slow growth rate. So newly planted river cane will not be large enough to harvest probably within my lifetime. So an important part of culture throughout the Southeast was basket making, but there are now less than 200 Cherokee basket makers who know how to correctly harvest, dye, and weave these baskets. There's a lot of people that maybe are learning the process of weaving baskets, but river cane can be so hard to find at this point that they're having to use maybe invasive or non-traditional species. I know I took a basket making class with a Cherokee Nation weaver. And then I was also able to take a weaving class with a local EBCI weaver, just making paper mats, which again is keeping that tradition alive. But a lot of basket makers aren't able to find river cane around here. So grassland trees and plants were not just used to make baskets, obviously, but where am I going with this? Sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. Anyways, a lot of grassland plants and trees were used to make baskets, not just river cane, but also white oak and longleaf pine needles. And so a lot of these basket making materials come from these ecosystems. A lot of tribes are using these grassland species to bring back some of these cultural uses. So one example of this is the Alabama Coushatta in Texas, and they've started doing longleaf pine restoration specifically with the goal of restoring these ecosystems so that they can bring back these species for their basket makers, and that includes bringing back cultural fire. So a couple of these pictures on here, there's a longleaf pine basket made by an Alabama Coushatta citizen. There's a basket display that can be found at the Museum of the Cherokee People. And then there's also a lot of uses, outside of baskets that can be medicinal uses, food, or textiles. On the bottom left in this is a pair of slippers that were found in Mammoth Cave that were made out of rattlesnake master, and then a torch that was made from river cane. There's a Chickasaw fishing basket, a blowgun, and then hickory trees are still being used to make stickball sticks today. I think people who work in the ecology field, botanists, things like that, they often feel a lot of ecological grief and burnout. But I think for Indigenous people, we deal with the grief of losing our lifeways. It was illegal for us to do ceremonies until the 70s, and we're still fighting to save our languages. Our traditional foods and medicines are disappearing at an alarming rate. And then there's still policies that make some of our practices illegal on our own lands, and people are still suffering from generational trauma. I think the only way we can save any of these is to save all of them, because it's all just interconnected and we can't have one without the other. Indigenous people have always been here. We've always interacted with the land and the plants and the animals, and we just need to relearn the balance. I think one thing that's really concerning is that as we lose our tribal elders, we're losing a lot of these cultural traditions. But when we work together to restore the land, we can work to restore these lifeways. So I'm going to get really into SGI's tribal program strategic plan. So we wrote this starting, I guess, over the winter. But we worked really hard to make this into kind of a living document with the understanding that Indigenous culture doesn't fit neatly into a Western framework. And we are extremely conscientious of the language we use, and we tried to build something that involves tribal members from the beginning instead of trying to fit them into this box. And then tribal ecological knowledge is not a transactional resource to be passed off from tribal members to scientists. And we want to make sure that we're working with tribal members to make sure that they are receiving what they want out of this, and it's not just this transactional resource or extortion. So the liaisons built what we call the turtle. Once we landed on the turtle, we had to stick with 5. So we went with outreach, listen, assist, engage, and partner. And then you can see outreach starts with just connecting with tribes who currently or historically are caretakers of lands within SGI's focal region. We want to create opportunities for tribally led Indigenous ecological knowledge to be integrated into all conservation and restoration efforts. And then in the future, host workshops, webinars, and educational meetings outlining how SGI's tribal program may benefit interested Native communities and landowners in tribally led projects. So then listen is just meet with interested tribes and tribal members, making sure that we're actually listening to what Indigenous communities want and understand where they're coming from and the relationships that they have to the land. and then understand what resources they have available to them, and then working within those limitations and see how we can help, and then assist. We are funded through NRCS, which means that we can assist tribal citizens with applying for the Farm Bill program and other assistance programs available through NRCS, and then also assisting Native American tribes and citizens with conservation restoration efforts. And then the big one is assist SGI's science team in collaborating with tribes and tribal citizens and conservation restoration efforts within our region. We want to stay engaged, and that is, showing up and continuing to show up and sustain long-term relationships long after our conservation restoration is done. And then we also want to partner with, other foundations and agencies that are doing similar work. Some of our initiatives are partner and collaborate with tribes to bring Indigenous land management back to the Southeastern United States, assist tribes with co-stewardship and seed sharing opportunities, provide mentorship and skills that could lead to future long-term employment within conservation and restoration, prioritize tribal data sovereignty. It's important that when we talk about traditional ecological knowledge, we make sure any cultural knowledge we are learning from a particular tribe isn't shared outside our organization if the tribe doesn't want it shared, which can mean signing MOUs if necessary. And it's not up to outside agencies to decide what can be shared. It's up to the tribes. Again, even if it has been shared publicly in the past, I think it's important that we listen to what tribes want now. We also want to collaborate without expectations. So there's a history of consulting with tribes. And then there's also a history of outside agencies that would consult with tribes about traditional knowledge, and then the tribe never hears from them again. And then we want to collaborate without expectation, and that's meet tribes where they are and understand that not all tribes have the same capabilities and resources available to them. We also want to support tribal communities by providing access to culturally significant plants and animals at our restoration sites. Which leads us into the work that we've been doing for the last year and a half. So I was assigned to work with the restoration team, and Katie, the other tribal liaison, was assigned to work with the seed team. But we were both kind of able to have this on-the-ground restoration training, and that involved going out with project partners and our director of ecological restoration. We've learned a lot about just SGI's restoration projects and goals, restoration techniques, plan identification, and a lot of other things. We've been given the opportunity to work with former Senator Bill Frist and his wife Tracy on their property in Middle Tennessee to do a meadow restoration project. So we'll be able to kind of learn the whole process of meadow restoration at the site. And then we worked with the Catawba Nation on a restoration site that's now being restored by Roundstone Native Seed. And that is returning culturally significant plants to their site. In the future, we want to kind of figure out how to work with tribes on co-stewardship opportunities and allow members to visit our restoration sites, harvest traditional medicinal plants, and also learn about our work and be able to interact with their homelands. So I've kind of been all over the past 2 years. I actually just started my first intentional fire, I think about a week and a half ago. I learned how to drive a tractor and use a seed spreader and all these different things. And I think it's important that I'm able to have these opportunities to learn all these things and then, bring it home, but also incorporate, like I said, incorporate Indigenous knowledge wherever I can. So it's just kind of this exchange that's actually happening on the land. And I think it's important to reconnect with the land. So I have a really important, Katie and I both have a goal of reconnecting tribal members with our homelands. tribal members have a lot of place-based knowledge. And so we consider this knowledge, again, maybe sometimes to be sleeping, and we need to interact with the land to wake it back up. And traditions and practices vary by tribes and families and individuals, but when we're able to actually get out on the land and interact with it, we can learn so much and have these educational exchanges between traditional knowledge and Western science, and kind of what does that look like and what can we learn from each other. I think a lot of people just automatically assume that Indigenous people know a lot about the land and interact with it daily, and that's not always necessarily true. And so when we have these opportunities to learn Western science or even learn our own traditions out on the land, it's really unique. And I think Kawauhi is another example of this, where, you know, Cherokee tribal members have always been able to go up to Kawauhi and interact with the land there, but even the name change, you can see the shift that's happened over the past year where people have access to this place in a different way now, and it's allowing the tribe to build these partnerships with the National Park Service. And I think it's just a great example of how we can use the land in order to build these relationships. I think these two pictures, I went out with the National Forest Service, and we were able to just visit some land, and we learned about the plants that are there and how they're unique to this site. And so I think sometimes just going out on the land without an agenda and having these cultural and knowledge exchanges are really able to help a lot of Native people reconnect with the land. We also do a lot of education and outreach. I've traveled a lot to meet with tribes throughout the Southeast, just to kind of tell them who SGI is and what we do. I think it's important, like I said, to show up and continue to show up so they know who I am, and they see me and they know I'm not just going to, disappear when I say I'm going to do something. If I say I'm going to do it, I want to ensure that they know I'm going to do it. We've also attended a variety of conferences hosted by Indigenous and scientific organizations. And we want to help connect tribes with partners that are doing similar work, even if it's not necessarily within our own organization. And then we're part of a lot of working groups. I'm part of the America's Grassland campaign, which just brings together people who are interested in saving America's grasslands. A lot of people at SGI are also part of it. And then I think one thing Katie is really passionate about right now is the Intertribal Plant and Seed Working Group. And that is ensuring that, tribes across the country are able to seed share, because right now that's not necessarily happening, especially in the Southeast. And we're also part of the Southeast Seed Team. We're part of Seed Bank working groups, and then the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, which is working on just connecting tribes who are doing cultural fire and working through the policies and how they need to change and what's working and what's not. And so it's just having these opportunities to have these conversations. So I want to talk some about SGI's other programs. We have our Native Seed Program, Grasslandia, a National Park Service project, our volunteer program. And then, so I'm fully remote. I think it puts me in a very unique situation where I am able to still go out and interact with my community and learn from tribal elders. And so SGI, we have a very large focal region, and right now we're based in Clarksville, Tennessee, but we also have satellite offices in Little Rock, Arkansas, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and also Roanoke, Virginia. And then we have remote workers kind of all over this place. This is actually an older map, so we've added a lot of new workers who are working remote as well. So some of these partnerships and projects, we're working with the National Park Service right now across 39 parks throughout the Southeast, and these are not just within SGI's focal region. They're from Vermont down into Texas. So 3,700 plus acres and 16 states and 39 national parks, so 120 different sites. I was actually able to go out and view one of the ones that's at Kate's Cove and just being able to see these kind of long-term plans. A lot of these are in the kind of northern part of the country, which means some of them are, Civil War battle sites, and people think the Civil War, a lot of the battles happened within these grassland areas. And so it's going in and making sure that you're restoring these sites to what they would have looked like at the time, and just making sure they're healthy and well taken care of. We're also working with multiple partners, pursuing scientific research aimed at helping us better understand the historic extent of the grasslands, their current status, and how to go about restoring them, and then prioritizing the amount of work that needs to be done. And so Grasslandia, I showed you our focal region map, which is just, it's green if we consider it to be a more open ecosystem. The goal of Grasslandia is to do this more in-depth dive into what these ecosystems would have looked like. I was also able to go out with the Grasslandia team, I think last month, and watch them do some plot work where they're just going out to these different sites and, seeing what kind of plants are still there and what kind of restoration work would need to be done. I think Grasslandia is really amazing because it's doing the historical research on how these lands have been used, what they look like, and again, what restoration work needs to be done in order to save some of these ecosystems. So I'll have our native seed program, and we are part of Seeds of Success. So we're helping just kind of fill the gap in the Southeastern region. These numbers might be old now, but 148 total collections done in the Southeast with partners. The seed team also just scouts and collects seeds and reports population data. And this is, a nationwide effort, but I think SGI kind of saw that there was this need for more information coming from the Southeast. And so they've started working with partners in order to do this. We also have a volunteer program. A lot of it is based in Clarksville. We have a really great volunteer coordinator, and she puts together a lot of great information for our volunteers, but we also have some in our satellite areas as well, such as in Chattanooga. This is just a graphic that one of our seed team did. I think it really kind of shows everything that goes into seed collection, cleaning, and everything that the seed team does. We have a lot of current partnerships. Work with Roundstone Native Seed on a lot of things. They have a lot of experience prepping sites for restoration and providing native seeds. Obviously, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, and BLM. And then I think one that's I've been more involved in is, when I can, is City of Chattanooga. And Zach Irick, who's over in Chattanooga, is working closely with them to restore grassland areas in a lot of their city parks. There's also partners we don't have listed here. There's a lot of things happening. I just like to end. These are some highlights. This is a purple fringeless orchid that was found at one of the SGI sites on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. This is actually the site I was able to burn about a week and a half ago, but this year was the first time they've seen one of these come up since the restoration on this site started. One of our coordinators was able to find this globally rare plant species in a wetlands. It was considered to be potentially extinct in 4 of the 7 states that it's, but 4 of the 7 states that compromises global distribution. So it had not been seen in the state since 1960. So again, SGI Central Appalachian Grasslands Coordinator Elena discovered it in a new location in Virginia and said it was a pretty large population. So that's exciting. And then one thing that I always enjoy is Zach Irick is working in restoring the southernmost cranberry bog that's been found. And it's one that's close enough that I'm able to go over and help him when I can. So I've been able to kind of see this process happen of going in and kind of clearing out some of these trees and restoring healthy habitat. And it's really cool. I got to see it flower for the first time this year. And I'm really hoping I can go over and see some cranberries in the next couple of months. But that is all I have. This is our contact information. Obviously, if you have any questions outside of this, feel free to contact me. If you have, seed specific questions, Katie's great for it. But Katie and I kind of work together on everything. And so, you can't do restoration without seeds and can't have seeds without restoration. So.
Thank you so much, Corlee. And I know since you're sharing, you can't see the teams, but tons of applause and hearts for this fantastic presentation. Really appreciate you being here and sharing all of this amazing information with us. Such important work. We do have time, probably 10 or 12 minutes for some questions. So I'll just ask, this is super well attended, which is awesome. So I'll just ask that just to help keep things a little bit organized, if you wouldn't mind using the raise hand feature, there should be a little hand symbol that says raise up on the top of your menu. Please use that if you'd like to ask a question verbally, or you're welcome to put any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll monitor that and read those aloud for the benefit of the recording. So I'm going to stop talking here for a second and see what questions folks have. Lizzie King, I see your hand. Feel free to take yourself off mute and jump in.
Hi, thanks, Corlee, for a fantastic presentation. I was wondering if you could give us an idea of just the geographic range of different river cane restoration projects that are going on, and what the sort of communication between different tribes is on that?
Yeah, there's actually, like I said, I think there's a pretty big movement for river cane restoration right now. I attended the River Cane Gathering, had a great webinar series. We're in kind of the tail end of, they have one more, and then like Hillary said, they'll be presenting next month. But I think there's river cane restoration kind of going on throughout the Southeast. I know the Choctaw are doing a lot, UKB, Eastern Band, Catawba, and I think there's a couple of different organizations that are really helping with that. River Cane Restoration Alliance and River Cane Gathering and the National Forest Service and all these places that are just kind of allowing this communication to happen. And I think everybody just kind of working together finally and having these conversations. I think there's a lot of excitement within this movement. And then, as they said, I think there's a lot of potential for, students that are looking for research projects. River cane right now would be perfect for it. So yeah, I think it's kind of all over, and it's really exciting. I think, being in Western North Carolina, seeing the effects of lean too, I think there's this movement to kind of see what kind of river cane restoration is available for places like Asheville, and how that would help alleviate, any future flooding and things like that.
So is SGI able to help connect those tribal efforts with efforts that aren't on tribal lands or aren't necessarily, currently accessible as homelands?
So that's kind of one of our future goals. We have a restoration site where we're working with Google on one of their properties, and there's some river cane there, and we've discussed the possibility of tribal members being able to go in and harvest from there. It's one of those, it's a mutual beneficial relationship for tribal members as well as the river cane, as long as we're harvesting it correctly. And I think we have some plans to get some river cane tribal experts out to Google, hopefully in the very near future, in order to teach us about it. And so I think any potential sites where SGI is working, if there's good river cane there, if the landowner is interested in allowing tribal members on that land, we are very open to it. I think it's one of those things that I'm very interested in learning correct harvesting techniques to where even if I'm out somewhere in the Southeast and I'm able to harvest some river cane and bring it home to where it's actually being used, I'm very open to that as well.
I will just plug briefly, thank you for that question, Lizzie, since you brought up Helene Corlee. I'm from Western North Carolina too. A very near and dear topic to my heart. My family's still there. And Adam Griffith is going to be one of the presenters on next month's webinar. And he's the extension agent who works with Eastern Band of Cherokee. And he's going to specifically be talking about the role that river cane did and can play in the future in extreme flood events, looking at Helene. So if that's a topic that interests you, I definitely do encourage you to come next month. I'm super excited to hear more about that. Great question, Lizzie. Anybody else? Oh, I see there is one in the chat from Katie McLean with Carolina Wetlands. Have you worked with any of the tribes in Central North Carolina, like the Lumbee?
We have not. We have worked with the Catawba, but you know they're close to Charlotte and they're doing a lot of great restoration. Like I said, they just did their restoration project, and I know that they do a lot of river cane restoration as well. They've done a lot of rhizome transplants. I'm always interested to talk to them because they're doing a lot of really cool work too. But their grassland restoration project's awesome, where they're just trying to put in medicinal plants and being able to restore them so that tribal members can use them.
Katie, it's such a good question, and I know Carolina Wetlands Association has done a lot of fantastic work in partnership with the Lumbee on kind of natural solutions to flood mitigation, maybe potential future collaboration there. I know Corlee's got her contact information on this slide, so maybe that's something y'all could compare notes on later. Other questions? Here's one from Brandon Garcia in the chat. You mentioned working with National Park Service and worked with my park at Big South Fork, but has SGI worked with the Inventory and Monitoring Division within the National Park Service? The Appalachian Highlands Inventory and Monitoring Network is actually located in Asheville.
So I'm assuming yes. I'm probably not the person to answer that. I've not done a ton of work. But I know, Grasslandia is also doing a lot of work within the National Park Service system as well. So I'm assuming that yes.
Great, thanks. We can probably take 5 more minutes for questions or other exciting suggestions of potential future partnerships if other folks want to weigh in. From Corey Chattis, are there any perennials of special interest to conserve or restore within the broader grasslands ecosystem? Sounds like particular species.
I guess it kind of depends on the ecosystem. Again, I'm not a botanist, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I know for me specifically, I'm trying to talk to members about medicinal plants that maybe they don't have, where they are now, but would have been found where they were historically. Even for, members of the Eastern Band, we're still within our homelands, but we're within this very limited range and maybe don't have grassland plants that we historically would have used. But I think for SGI, restoring these ecosystems is always going to be important, and whatever plants and things that we can.
Thank you for that. Have you been able to work with any tribes in Pennsylvania? I'm guessing that's outside the geography of the Southeast Grasslands Institute, but do you have any connections with folks in Pennsylvania?
So I don't. I think probably the furthest north that we've gone so far is into Virginia. But again, we've been doing this just, I would say, a very short period of time. And so, again, anyone who's interested in contacting me, feel free. I'm interested in kind of talking to everybody. So.
Sounds great. And sounds like someone who actually works on Grasslandia has weighed in the chat that he doesn't think we work with I&M, but they do monitor their Park Service restoration sites and do community vegetation research plots on Park Service land separately, like Corlee said. Any other questions or parting thoughts? We maybe have time for one more, and then I'm going to take back the sharing here and wrap up. Owen, I see your hand.
Good morning. We're currently working with SGI at a site in Centerville, Tennessee, and we have set aside about 7 or 8 acres specifically for Indigenous cultural activities and preservation work at one site, and then we have about 15 or 20 acres at another site, and we'll be working with Vero on this, as well as Roundstone. And I was just curious what the first steps are to get that going.
That is a good question. I would say obvious first step is identifying historically whose land it would have been, and being able to connect those tribes. And then I think once that connection happens, having the first kind of on the ground meeting, I think is really important. I think every meeting should be outside and actually on the land. Maybe, again, like I said, sometimes these meetings are best if you don't have this set agenda and just let people kind of come and kind of figure out what they want to do. So, yeah, I would say identify whose land it would have been historically, and we can get you in touch with them and kind of go from there.
Wonderful, thank you. We're in very early stages on all this, but we are setting aside a number of places specifically for this in the future, and we have no expectations or timelines or anything. We just want to get involved and do what we can.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. I think we have a lot of opportunity to actually get people out there and interacting with the land.
Thank you. You're welcome out here anytime.
Thanks, Owen. And we'll squeeze in one last question from Lizzie King, just saying that the historical ecology work at SGI is so interesting. Have you and Katie been able to engage tribal members in that historical ecology work, as it seems it would be mutually beneficial?
In some ways, yeah. I think the unique thing about this job, like I said, is that I am at home. Katie is at home. She's based near Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and is a citizen of Cherokee Nation. And so I think anytime we have questions about ecological history or plants or anything like that, I can go talk to my tribal elders, or I can go to someone at SGI and be like, hey, some tribal member asked me about this and I have no idea how to answer it. And so I think it's that unique situation that not a lot of people have, where we're kind of really are right in the middle of everything. And then I'm, at home, I'm part of a kind of team that's working on cultural fire within EBCI and what that looks like. And a lot of what I bring is what I've learned from SGI. And, a lot, like I said, a lot of these fire dependent plants are found in grasslands. And so we talk about those a lot. And so, it's just that informational exchange that can happen between or with me and Katie, because we are interacting both with SGI and with our tribal communities. And the tribal community is a larger whole as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And that makes a ton of sense. It sounds like a really unique model that's working super well for y'all.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to cut the questions off here, but we can circle back and open the floor again, depending. I want to be respectful of Corlee's time, but if people are just chomping at the bit to ask more questions, and if you are able to stay past 11, we could continue the conversation. But I'm just going to grab the sharing back here really quick, because I do think, based on the direction that this conversation has taken, it sounds like there's going to be really strong interest in next month's webinar, and I want to make sure you all know where to go for that. So I definitely encourage you to register. I'm going to drop the link in the chat one more time. That date will be the 16th of October, as always, the third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern. And we're going to be hearing from 2 representatives of the River Cane Restoration Alliance. So that'll really be building on today's focus on tribal engagement and talk about the work of the River Cane Restoration Alliance. So Michael serves as the director of the Conserve Research Group at the University of Alabama, which stands for Community-Oriented Nature-Based Science for Ecosystem Restoration and Versatile Engineering. So Conserve, it's a mouthful. And then Adam Griffith will be our other presenter, and he is with North Carolina State University's Cooperative Extension Program. He works as an area agent in community resource development for the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And so they're going to be discussing restoration efforts for native river cane across the Southeast that's been conducted in partnership with tribes, specifically highlighting success stories in Alabama and North Carolina, and ongoing genetic work that's been recently funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and a lot more. So definitely don't miss that web forum. And then I wanted to share a quick update from your SECAS staff, just to say that the 2025 update to the Southeast Conservation Blueprint is on track for release next month. In the face of kind of all of the upheaval that has faced federal employees this year, we're really proud to still be on track for that. And if you want to learn more about what's new with Blueprint 2025, what improvements we've made, how to access the data, definitely encourage you to tune into the November 20th web forum, also at 10 a.m. Eastern, where Rua is going to be presenting on all that is good with Blueprint 2025. So I'm going to drop the link to that webinar as well into the chat. So feel free to get registered for that if you're interested. And then lastly, I always like to end on this slide. If you'd like to get more involved in the SECAS partnership, one easy way to do it is to subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do on the footer of any page of our website, secassoutheast.org. That'll get you subscribed to our once monthly newsletter and a once monthly reminder email about this web forum, so you never miss a topic of interest to you. Your staff would love to hear from you. You can see the contact information for our remaining 6 staff on the staff page. And if you'd like to see what partners are participating more formally in our SECAS governance, you can see that on the partners page as well. We would love to help you use the blueprint in your work. User support is completely free, whether you would like a letter of support for a grant, or help incorporating the blueprint into a conservation plan, or just help informing a decision, brainstorming how it could help support your work. That's what we're here to do. We'd love to hear from you. And if you've used the blueprint and you have feedback on ways that we can improve it, we would love to hear about that as well, and hope that you will reach out to us. So with that, I'm going to pause again just to see if there are more burning questions for Corlee before we hang up today, or for me. Hearing none, just another huge thank you to you for being here. A fantastic presentation. We had really strong interest, obviously, in this topic. So thanks for the amazing work that you do. And we'll see everybody next month, I hope. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.